Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the show. We have taken a 3-week hiatus on a very, very commentary, and we are back today. I'm in beautiful British Columbia, and particularly in the city of Kelowna, which is in the interior of BC. And we are continuing our series on health and wellness and medicine. And today I have a very special guest on. It's a very personal and powerful episode with Dr. Jamie Marich. She is a world's leading expert at EMDR therapy. So, what is EMDR? It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So, she's going to tell us what that means, but it is definitely not the conventional way of therapy and counseling. And she's a trauma expert. She's gone through a lot of different things herself, and she will explain all of those. But it's going to be an exciting episode, and we're going to learn a lot. So if you have ever been a victim of trauma, if you have things in your life that you just can't seem to get over, I personally do, we are going to hear from Dr. Marich. So stay tuned. Hey, Dr. Merritt, I'm so excited to have you on. And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about, I know you are like a foremost expert on EMDR and trauma therapy, and you've been through a lot yourself, which I'd love for you to give us a background on how you got into this type of therapy, because a lot of people know verbal therapy,
Sure.
conversational therapy, which I also have a therapist that I talk to
Mhm.
on occasion. But I'm really interested in this because EMDR, which you can explain what that is, because I know
Mhm.
it's a long word, or it's a long couple of words, um, is a different kind of therapy that works on a different kind of cellular or a neurotransmitting. Is that how you would say it, or neural level, or
I would say it works with the brain differently than traditional talk therapy would. So, just to get some of the terminology out of the way, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It is a mouthful. You got that
it
part
is?
right for
It is,
sure.
yeah.
And I even heard the founder, Dr. Francine Shapiro, interviewed once where she said if she could do it over again, she probably would have simply named it reprocessing therapy. But as we may or may not get into, part of the origin story of what we now know as EMDR involved this spontaneous discovery she made with her eyes moving back and forth. And after she conducted some initial investigation, the ultimate conclusion was that something about the eyes moving back and forth does something. I'm using as kind of plain language as possible to get to areas of the brain that we can't quite easily get to by just talking alone. But I
Interesting.
want to back up and answer the first part of your question because before I give the total, I love EMDR. I want to explain how it came into my life because I would not be here being such an enthusiast and advocate and teacher for it if I didn't have such an amazing personal experience with it myself. So I was introduced to EMDR in 2004. I had about 2 years clean and sober at that point. There was a whole lot of trauma and mental health history before that. And I do credit both talk therapy because I am not one to knock talk therapy. I think it has a lot of value. And certainly the first two therapists I saw worked more from a talk modality. And then I also value a lot of the 12-step ideas for helping me to get my initial sobriety. Yet after those first 2 years, as I describe it, I wanted to maintain my sobriety. I was proud of it, and my mental health was still in a really bad place.
Did you do the 12 steps? Sorry to interrupt. Did you do the
Yeah,
12 steps? You
yeah,
went
yeah.
through
I
that?
I had been through the 12 steps. Was continuing to work them. I was very much in this place of knowing cognitively and even spiritually what I should be doing to feel better mentally, but something just was still very stuck. And so I was working on my clinical internship at that time as a mental health counselor, and I was fortunate to have a coworker who identified a lot of distress I was still experiencing, and he suggested that I do more therapy. And he said, ask one of your graduate professors for a recommendation for somebody good. And a little of my resistance was I didn't know how more talking about things was going to help or how much more step work was going to help. And so I was given this card to go to a therapist who she was branded to me at, or pitched to me as she does all the weird things. And I no longer see
Unusual.
EMDR. Yeah, I no longer see EMDR as weird. It is just maybe weird or unusual to what we in mainstream culture see as therapy, mainstream Western culture. So I went to see my first EMDR therapist, and not only did she accurately diagnose some of what was going on with me from a mental health perspective, but she introduced this pretty remarkable therapy into my life. And I was in a place where I was so hungry for solutions other than the let's talk it out. How does that make you feel type of
Were you
norm.
still struggling with your sobriety at that time?
Not with my sobriety. Like it
Oh,
was interesting. Like I wanted to stay sober. Like I really had that resolve. But this baffles a lot of people to say, I wanted to stay sober, but on a lot of days I still wanted to die. I was still dissociating pretty problematically. Like my mental health was just in not a wonderful place, even though I had my sobriety and was very proud of it. So EMDR was recommended. I read the brochure on it, and at an earlier time in my life, I may have discounted it, especially when I was kind of more traditionally religious, because that's a lot of how I was raised. But I was in such a place of I am willing to try anything different. And I did. And I always say I never want it to sound like a television commercial or a quick fix infomercial like I did EMDR for one summer and I was cured. I did EMDR for one summer and it felt like the most effective therapy I ever had. Like that
wow.
wanting to die lifted. And I still
Wow.
continue to do EMDR. I still engage, not very regularly anymore, but at least as needed with an EMDR therapist. It's just, the way that I feel my brain responds best to therapy.
Well, tell me if I'm right. I heard a analogy about
Mhm.
EMDR that probably is very simple for most people to
Hear it.
maybe
Yeah.
understand. And the analogy was that that your brain is like your closet,
Mhm.
and if you just shove things in the corner of the closet that maybe would represent traumatic events, you just shove them in the floor in the closet, and each time you open up that closet you see those things laying on the floor, but you never do anything about them. They just sit there, that pile of
Mhm.
shoved clothes, or things that you just have left there. And that EMDR is like filing them, like taking them, folding them neatly, putting those things on the shelf. And you do that in your brain. So you take those traumatic events and you tuck them away, or you put them in a cup, you compartmentalize them. Is that
Oh,
accurate?
I
Or
think it's a good metaphor. I want to build on it though a little bit because I think that metaphor describes how a lot of therapies can work.
hmm,
So what would make EMDR unique is it helps you to do it effectively, but in a more expedient manner. And the therapist who's taking you through it doesn't need to know the full story with all the words and gory details about every little piece of clothing.
wow.
Because talk therapy is often characterized by the tell me the whole story behind this, tell me the details, get it out. Because there is something to this. Whatever you hold on to can keep you stuck.
Mhm.
But I think in Western society, especially, we put such a high value on words, like we have to talk about it. And the reality is, a lot of people have talked about their trauma till they're blue in the face, but
Yeah.
they've not experienced true resolution because their body self, their emotional self, maybe their spiritual self hasn't been able to fully feel what they didn't let themselves feel at the time. Whatever we don't address has the tendency to, come back. But
Mhm.
let's talk about what it means to address something because a lot of people talk about things quite a bit, but they've never let themselves had a full feeling experience with it, or maybe have never let themselves feel it through, maybe talk it through. That can be a part of it. But creative practices or just really getting into the body experience of it can help shift how the memory is stored in the brain. Because EMDR or any effective trauma therapy is not about making you forget what happened, because nothing can do that, especially with traumatic grief. But
Mhm.
hopefully, through EMDR or other therapy, we can facilitate an experience where the memory gets stored or linked, it might be a better way of saying it, in a way where it doesn't carry the charge anymore. And you are able to, it might be crass to say get on with your life, but you're able to adapt in your life. Uh,
Reprocess it.
yeah, reprocess it. Yeah. And the reason Dr. Shapiro, the founder, named it reprocessing is the thought that when traumatic events happen, often we do stuff them and we're not given a chance to process them. Sometimes it's a choice, like I don't want to deal with this, so I'm not going to do it. But
Mhm.
if you're a young child growing up, let's say in a dysfunctional, alcoholic, otherwise type of home where you're not allowed to feel your feelings, where you're told things like, I'll give you really something to cry about, or where there's not this sense of safety to express yourself, that can get buried. We can compartmentalize it in a way that, yeah, it stays out of the way, but our body still feels it. Our body can still experience it in some way. So she named it reprocessing with the understanding that it never had a chance to process initially.
Now, does
Or
EMDR work for, I know you're a trauma
Mhm,
specialist, so you deal with that kind of, and also
sure.
addiction as well, right? You've
Yes.
dealt with people with addiction, which my brother was also, he
Mhm.
was an addict for many years. He passed away last year.
Sorry.
And thank you. I wish I had known about EMDR when we tried everything for my brother. He did have moments of being clean, but
Mm,
and I'm only going to say this because it reminded me of something you said in the beginning about that you were clean and sober, but you
mhm.
sometimes wanted to die. You still had,
Right.
and my brother was like that, where he would have times where he was clean and sober, but he hated himself for what he had done and what he had been through. And he said,
Mm,
You just don't understand. Like, I live with the things that I did while I was not sober. But those, that trauma, you wonder, why did that, was there something there that maybe we didn't know about, or he didn't know about, or something that he was suppressing, that made him go to drugs? And
mhm.
could there have been another way of helping him mentally that we didn't
Well,
explore?
yeah, and it's interesting because this is a commonplace English language expression that people have their demons.
Yeah.
And, even though that can be more spiritual, religious language, I think when we're talking about trauma, a way to look at demons are either these parts or these aspects of ourselves we've not let be seen. It could be parts or aspects of ourselves that do represent some of our deepest, darkest, either things we have done to others or things
Mhm.
that were done to us. And sometimes it's both.
Right.
And so, even though I have a spiritual practice as well as a trauma clinician, I would first look at what's the story behind what a person would describe as their demons. And in EMDR therapy, we tend to ask questions like, what's a negative belief about yourself you carry? So if you're thinking it's something like, no matter what I do, I'm going to mess it up, or I'm not worthy of love, we then ask a person as they're feeling prepared for it, to reflect back on their life. And when is the first time you got that message? Perhaps when's the worst time you got that message? When's the most recent time you got that message? And
Hmm.
gives us enough of a history around what a therapeutic theme might be, or what we might in common language call a demon um,
Hmm.
that needed faced. And we get at a little bit of that backstory.
Yeah. So usually on the podcast, I share personal story, yeah,
Sure,
personal
yeah.
stories. So one of the things that I've been dealing with, and people who watch my podcast know, my mother passed away 6 years ago, um, and it was very unexpected. She
Yeah.
was very healthy. She went into an elective surgery to get a heart valve repaired. I didn't feel good about it. But that morning, I was with her in her bedroom. She was took her shower. She looked like she was going to an office job. And I said, Mom, you look like you're going not to surgery. She had her hair curled and she had a
Hmm.
white blouse on and black pants. And she had her bag packed. We went through her bag for the hospital. She had her rosary in there, and she had on, or she had some, like, her hairbrush. And a book to read. And it was the most amazing morning that I was gifted that morning with her. But she wasn't afraid. And I kept saying, "Are you afraid?" But I was afraid for some reason inside, even though so many people had said, you know, valve repairs are very easy. I just didn't feel good about it.
Mhm.
And uh, 6, 7 hours later in the operation, the doctor came out and said, folks, I can't get her heart restarted. We might not win this one today. But that trauma is something that I can never get over, the feeling of I could have stopped her that morning. It's
Yeah.
not only am I dealing every day and I can't sleep at night sometimes because I think of her. Sorry.
Mm.
I
Don't
think
be
of her
sorry.
that morning and I think like I wanted the snow to come down. It was snowing that morning and I thought I wish the snow would come down so we get a blizzard. I wish that the doctor would get sick and call in. For some reason I had that but out of everyone, I got that hour with her in the bedroom and I kept saying, "Are you afraid, Mom?" She goes, "Not at all." Nope. And she wheeled my dad into the hospital, wheeled him because he can't walk. She wheeled him in to her own operation. And I have trauma around it so bad that I have days where, I mean, there are, for 2 months or 2 years after my mom passed, like I wasn't a good mom to my kids. I
Mhm.
was completely, it affected me so much because I
Mhm.
wasn't expecting it and I wished I could have stopped it. And so
Yeah.
that trauma in itself, not only did I lose her, but I wished I could have done something to not make her do it. And I hold on to that.
So the biggest thing I'm hearing in that, and this is where EMDR would approach it, is what's the message about self that you're carrying about yourself? And it's what I'm hearing is I could have stopped her.
Mhm. I'm a
And
fixer and I just, so why did I let her go that morning? I could have said
yeah,
something. I could
yeah.
have said, "No, Mom, I have this feeling you shouldn't go." And I didn't.
So what does that say about you? That you are a fixer, that you could have said something and you didn't? That would be my next follow-up question. Is there another I statement behind that?
That I couldn't, I feel like I get that I feel like I get these um intuitive
Mhm.
feelings. I get them quite often and that sometimes I don't play on them. I don't talk about my intuitive feelings and I feel like I
Mhm.
I don't want loss. I can't handle loss. It's very hard for me even to handle the loss of even a spider I take outside. Like I can't
Mhm.
uh I guess it tells me that I don't know, maybe I'm weak in that way. I can't
Well,
handle.
I'm hearing two potential ideas there. One is the obvious one, I could have stopped her
Mm.
as a cognition you're carrying, a belief you're carrying. And maybe there's another element here about not trusting your intuition. Um, I don't know if a belief like I can't trust my intuition fits here, or I should have trusted my intuition fits here.
Well,
Um,
interestingly enough, when I was a little girl or young girl, my dad had said to me quite often, "You have good intuition. The problem is you don't follow it." Like he would say that in a
ah,
negative way to me if I didn't do something I was meant to do, and he would often say that to me. The problem is you don't follow it.
Yeah. So how we'd approach this EMDR wise could be one of two ways, because we then generally, even if it's something that is more recent, like 6 years ago, it's still past. It's definitely the source of a trauma or a wound. But we may investigate, is there something even earlier that may need worked on? And so we could, language we use as EMDR therapist is target or set up for the method, this memory with your dad telling you that
Hmm.
there could be some activation or some charge there that might need to be addressed first. But we can also then work with the EMDR protocol or the method with the more obvious source of the trauma here, which is your mother's death. And if we were doing a full scale reprocessing session, it'd be very similar to what you just did, telling me, um, and you did a very good job giving me enough detail without getting totally overwhelmed with the detail.
Yeah.
But then an EMDR therapist would ask you just a couple key target questions, and you don't have to answer these right now, but it
Right.
might be, even as you tell me the story now, what image represents the worst part? What other sensory channel might represent the worst part. Then I'd ask you more question about your cognitions, your feelings, your body sensations as you're talking about it. And then once everything is what we'd call activated,
Mhm.
and he kind of got there, even,
Yeah.
as we're talking and experience some emotion, that could be a sign of activation. Then we would start what would traditionally be in EMDR, the back and forth eye movements that kind of define the method. Although over the years, Dr. Shapiro, the founder, even discovered that some people can't tolerate moving their eyes back and forth
Is it with your
for,
eyes open that you do this or with your eyes
yes,
closed?
it would be with
Oh,
your eyes open.
with your eyes open. So you
But
do this kind of thing.
yes, exactly. And
Okay.
then the therapist, because for it to be clinical EMDR therapy, the therapist would have to be guiding you and tracking you through the process and being there, being a witness to whatever might be coming up emotionally or somatically. And this is anything that an EMDR therapist is trained to do, to guide you through it.
This is gonna
Um,
be a stupid question probably,
no,
but
no stupid
the
questions.
only other eye movement that I think generally people know about is REM, right? Like rapid eye movement.
Yep.
Is there any significance to
Oh,
that?
yes. Yes, most definitely. So that was actually Dr. Shapiro's original working hypothesis, that as she tells the story, she was taking a walk in a park and stumbled upon this thing with her eyes that just happened when she was doing some thinking over things. It's a bit of a weird story, honestly, that I
I'd love
think,
to hear it. Or
well,
a
yeah,
summary
I
of
don't
it.
mind. No, I don't mind backing up on that because there's several different versions of the story out there, even in her books, that leads me to believe she probably took several different walks and developed this because she was a very trial and error person with her body. She was a cancer survivor. So she has said this in interviews that she, as a meditator, as a cancer survivor, was always experimenting. Like, if I do this with my movement, what would happen with my emotions? Or if I visualize this, what would happen with my body sensations? So, as she tells the story, she was taking a walk in the park. And as she was walking, some disturbing thoughts came up for her. And they're the type of thoughts you would have to normally engage deliberately, but they happen rather spontaneously. And as that was happening, she noticed her eyes moving back and forth. So she sat down along water, along trees, and traced the eye movements back and forth, just kind of kept going with the process.
Wow.
And then later that night, she brought up the same thoughts that had come up, and they just didn't have the same charge. And so she gathered a group of her friends together to see, let's see what happens when we do this deliberately. So if you're not seeing me, if you're listening to this, I'm moving my fingers back and forth across a horizontal line. And she would have people track for about 45 seconds to a minute and then ask them what they were noticing next. And so what she initially posited was it was a desensitization technique, hence the eye movement
Right.
desensitization. And her working hypothesis was that perhaps she was tapping into REM sleep in an awakened state.
Oh,
Because if you've ever watched anybody sleep, you see the eyes moving back and forth. Like when
yeah.
somebody is in REM, their eyes are moving back and forth.
I
And
know when
we,
I used to peek in on my kids when they were sound asleep, I
yeah,
used to sometimes lift their eyes up and I could
yeah.
see their eyes.
And we do know that people process when they dream. That's one of the functions of the dreaming state, is to help us work through material. So personally, I think there's still something to that. There's been more investigations to show that perhaps there is more going on in the brain than just that. Um, like, and we as EMDR therapists can even debate on how this is really working in the brain. Is it the REM sleep idea? Is it something else called working memory being taxed by this task of eye movements? Is the back and forth eye movements creating essentially like a white noise in the brain that's helping things to desensitize? Because the other interesting finding about a year after eye movement desensitization was first published is she discovered you didn't need eye movements to do it,
Ah,
because a blind person came along who could not easily track the eye movements. There was also concern about people with epilepsy moving their eyes for too long. And so they developed an alternative where a person can listen to alternating audio tones back and forth in the ears.
very
And
interesting.
it's interesting because even when that happens, you still see a little bit of eye movement. Another alternative is to tap. So if you're not seeing me on video here, my arms are crossed over my body and I'm tapping right side, left side, right side, left side, right side, left side. So people can
What does
tap
that do?
themselves. Hey, go ahead, give it a try. Mary's tapping here, right, left, right, left.
When you focus on that, I feel like my brain is focusing on that feeling, on that noise, even
Yeah.
the sound of it.
So, in and of itself, just the back and forth tapping could be like a relaxation or meditation technique for folks. But then, if you're in the EMDR method, you pair that together with the distressing event, and it hopes to create either a desensitization experience. And then, when she added the reprocessing, is she observed it wasn't just people were desensitizing the negative experience, they were also developing new self beliefs. Like, I did the best I could, or I
Okay. Yeah.
trust my intuition. And that's what we hope, like a whole journey through this EMDR protocol will lead people to, that not only is the distressing event desensitized, but more positive self belief states will emerge.
So you kind of change the narrative on it.
Yeah, it's a way to look at it. You change the narrative and you reframe the belief about self or the world that was obtained at the time of the traumatic experience.
So in the case of my mother, the issue, I mean, what I keep replaying in my head, I've often tried in my head to also say, okay, what if I would have stopped my mom from doing it and she wouldn't have gone? And then something else could have happened to her, or,
Yeah,
she would have
yeah,
blamed me for not having done it,
yeah.
or something, or maybe it would have worked out fine that morning and I would have.
And so, yes, this is good. So if that statement would come up in an EMDR session, what your therapist would say is go with that, meaning like that new insight that's popping up. Let's kind of test that out as we apply the eye movements or we apply the tapping.
Wow.
And it's possible you've already gotten there at a rational level. It sounds like you've done some work around this. I think what EMDR could reveal if there are still some kind of stuck layers of it at your emotional or body level. When we
Yeah.
cry, when we experience emotion, that's not just a rational experience. Emotion is part of what makes us us too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And too often we don't let ourselves go there, or therapists just, and this sounds bizarre for some people to hear this, but a lot of therapists are trained mostly to work with this domain of thinking and words, this
Right. And sometimes I
upskill
find that
brain.
thinking in words, especially with certain subjects, I avoid them. I
Hmm.
avoid them because I don't want to feel that pain. I don't want to
Hmm.
go back there and talk about it because I go back then and feel what I felt.
Hmm.
And that's ruins my entire day, ruins I mean, I go deep. I'm a very empathetic person, and I'm very like, and I am a deep, like,
Hmm.
emotional person. So I can't,
Hmm.
things don't just fly off of me very easily. So
Right.
I wish they did, but maybe it has its good parts and its bad parts. When my children were young, my husband cheated on me numerous times. I found out about the cheating, and it destroyed me for a very long time,
Oh.
and it destroyed my future relationships, until I was able to somehow work it through on my own. But it still is there. It still
Mhm.
creeps into sometimes where I don't trust people because I trusted that person, and the whole time that person was being unfaithful to me, and it destroyed me, my confidence, my, like, myself as a woman, and my, like, and I still deal with that, and I try not to. I don't talk about it. I haven't even talked about it in therapy because
Mhm.
I just feel like it's hard for me to go there. So I thought, is
Sure.
EMDR something that could help
Oh,
people who've gone through
yes.
things like that?
Yeah, because one of the things EMDR is known for is really embracing an expanded definition of trauma. That traditionally trauma has been conceptualized, and a lot of the profession still sees it this way, as something like going to war or surviving a natural disaster. But EMDR and Dr. Shapiro have always embraced that trauma is a wound. That's all trauma means. It comes from the Greek word meaning wound. So, of course, being cheated on is wounding. Of course, betrayal is a theme around which traumatic experiences can happen. And you hit a big nail on the head here that when you have a core trauma, it can filter into everything else that happens in your life.
During that period of time, after I found out that my ex-husband
Mhm.
betrayed me like so many times, and my children were so little, I lived in Vancouver. I had very few friends, no
Mhm.
family. I was just abandoned, lost, didn't know what to do, and I didn't want the kids to know. But what happened is I stayed with him for a year after that because I didn't know what to do. The kids were very young
Mhm.
in school. I stayed in, but I was gone. I was not in that relationship. But there were times that now, and I don't remember that period of time at all. Like, I don't remember. In fact, this is a funny story. My ex-husband said to me, do you remember when you sat down and met Billy Joel and he was listening to your music and you guys were sitting at a restaurant and you were talking to Billy Joel for like 2 hours? I have no recollection of it, like
Yeah.
zero. And so he said, I can't believe you don't remember that. Well, it was right after this whole trauma that I was so physically sick from it as well,
Right.
that I don't remember like a whole 2 years of time.
Dissociation goes hand in hand with traumatic experiences. And all dissociation means is to sever or divide yourself from an experience. And we've already talked about one of the biggest forms of dissociation, which is pushing emotions aside and like living up in your head. But this idea of blocking out memory, blocking out experiences, that can happen in the wake of a traumatic event, especially when your brain feels like it's in survival mode. So it doesn't mean you have a full-blown dissociative identity disorder, but it could mean that dissociation has been or, may still be part of how trauma impacts your life. So there's all different kinds of dissociative disorders.
It's so interesting to me because I'd never thought of like it's 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 shocking when you go, what? I don't remember that at all. Like, how could you not remember that? Like,
Yeah.
that's something most people would remember. I have no recollection of it at all, but it was,
Well, I was just kind of laughing there because my connection to that was, and this was after I was, many years in recovery, trauma and mental health wise, but I was getting out of my second marriage, which was abusive. And I tell this story in I think two of my books, where I was before the judge at our divorce hearing, and she asked me, and I was like in tears and just like very shattered, like, what did you pay for your house? And that's something like right now I could give you the figure, but
yeah,
I was so overwhelmed. I couldn't even, and was I dissociating or was it just a trauma response? I don't know. But I remember she said something like, I remember what I paid for my house. And it was just like, my brain is not online right now to
yeah,
answer
yeah.
rational questions or to remember even simple things like that. So all that to say, when we're in actively experiencing trauma or when we're in the aftermath of what we might call like trauma responses, our brain can go into this survival mode. And we may do things like be forgetful, or
Mhm.
we may do things like, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to keep it all together. Because a lot of us who are high achievers, that can be viewed as a trauma response too, if it's keeping us from, feeling things fully.
Let's just back up. I want to go to, you've written 15 books.
Yes.
Is that true? How can you
Yes.
write 15 books? That's incredible.
Well, we were talking about trauma response.
Yeah.
I love to write. It's definitely my favorite channel of communication. A lot of my books are more educational manuals and materials for the people that I train. But I also had the pleasure of I got to write my memoir last year called You Lied to Me About God.
Oh
And
yeah, you said
was
something about that. I wanted to ask you about that. Let me just look at my notes here. Yes, you said you lied to me about God, and I wanted to ask you what that was about.
Sure. So I grew up in a pretty, the nice word is interesting religious household. My parents were married Catholics. And then when I was 5, my father had a pretty deep conversion experience to, I will just say, a very hateful expression of evangelical Christian nationalist Christianity.
Oh
And
wow.
I was raised with my parents not wanting to divorce, but my mother wouldn't budge. She like doubled down on her Catholic devotion. So I was raised very conservative religious as somebody who definitely is not that in my natural way of being. I'm still a very spiritual person and I have a great connection with God, but more from an interfaith place.
Hmm.
And it was just a very regimented upbringing where the religious toxicity was coupled with a lot of other types of abuse I experienced. And I was bullied pretty badly in school at a Catholic school. And
Which
I was,
happens. I went to Catholic schools. I do know about that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And I was just the older, the oldest kid who was like navigating a lot of my parents' drama. And as I describe it, they both had, I would say, pretty hateful feelings about each other's religions, even though they were both expressions of Christianity. But they hated a lot of the same things in common too. So I spent a lot of my early life just really being, and this is where the title comes to, lied to about God. Because when I was in the depths of my addiction, I believe I found God truly. I have this line in the book, like at the bottom of the bottle is when real love found me. The God of my understanding, as it's taught in 12-step programs. And I was actually introduced to 12-step work by a very Catholic woman, somebody I had met working for the Catholic Church. But she was also very open. It was never this sense of like the Catholic way of looking at God or faith was the only way. And so when I started to embrace some more inclusive spirituality, when I started to discover that God is so many things, not just the real limited view that I got in the churches, that's
Agree.
when I started getting
Agree.
better. And so yeah, that's what you lied to me about God means. And it comes from one of my favorite teachings, which is that shame is the lie someone told you about yourself. That
Shame is
is
the lie someone told you about yourself.
Shame is the
That's
lie someone told
profound.
you about yourself. That's from Anais Nin, who was a French writer, French Cuban writer. And as I really explored a lot of my own spiritual upbringing and spiritual healing, it was not only was I lied to about myself, I was lied to about the very nature of God. I was lied to about myself in God's name. That,
Well,
yeah.
with the Catholicism, you think it stemmed from Catholicism pretty much?
Honestly, I had a worse experience on the evangelical Christian side of things.
Wow.
I mean, I think and I want to honor and hold everybody's experience with certain religions is different. So I
Mhm.
know some people got it really hard in the Catholic Church. I would say for me, the Catholic Church was actually a gentler experience.
Wow.
Wasn't gentle, let's be clear, because I
Yeah.
talk
It's another
I
degree of
it's
gentle.
another degree. And even now I've discovered that there are many different kinds of Catholics out there. Like you have very rigid conservative Catholics, you have Catholics who are like Father Richard Rohr, who's one of my favorite writers, just very progressive and inclusive.
Mhm. Mhm.
Uh, I would say, and I've even come to learn it's not even all evangelical Christians, but it was specifically the way my father chose to practice it. A lot of what we might now identify as Christian nationalism and this extreme exclusionary belief that it's Jesus or nothing
Right.
and a certain kind of Jesus. That's a lot of what really wounded me was growing up in that. So
How did
uh
you break free from all of that? Like, how did you?
needing to get sober is so much of what started me breaking free. Although interestingly, my first thought was, well, let me get back to religion. And I chose my Catholic side of my faith at that point. But it was through Catholicism that I met the 12 steps and a more inclusive recovery path. And through that I eventually got to therapy. So
Right.
it was a combination of in following my intuition first, knowing that I needed something spiritual, but eventually I was led to uh what 12 steps would call the God of my understanding. And this the spirituality of my understanding. But then it was so much of my early therapy, which included that first year of experience with the EMDR, that helped me to clear out a lot of those negative beliefs about self and about God too.
Ask you this question, doctor. Like, is there any kind of trauma or any um, instance where something like EMDR does not work for someone?
I have a very bold answer to that. I believe EMDR can work for anyone with any traumatic experience. Here's the big if it's properly adapted. Because when therapists are trained in EMDR, they can learn a very rigid scripted protocol. If you're doing that rigid scripted protocol with, let's say, somebody with dissociative identity disorder,
Mhm.
or if you're an EMDR therapist just kind of following the steps and you don't have a lot of experience, let's say working with complex grief, that's where EMDR may not lead to the best experience for someone. So I think EMDR can work for just about anybody as long as the therapist doing it knows that population really well and is able to adapt some of the basic EMDR protocols and steps to really meet the need of that person. But that's also not unlike any other form of therapy. That I think
Right.
therapy in general can work well for just about anybody, yet it has to be done in a way that meets the person where they're at. I do think some willingness to engage on the part of the
Yeah.
person coming is also a common factor.
But you do
So
something really unique too. I read that you can do dance movements, yoga. You incorporate movement.
I do. Mhm.
That's interesting. Tell me about that because that's very interesting. Because so many people do yoga and so many people meditate and so many people do dancing, but if you can incorporate healing.
Well, I think for a lot of people, yoga, dancing is how they access embodiment. Martial arts. I've also
Mhm.
had some of that in my experience as a way people can access embodiment. And how we're defining embodiment is really anything that helps a person notice what they're experiencing in their body without wanting to run away from it. Because in Western cultures, we tend to be very disembodied, it's all in the head.
Yes.
Uh, so I think yoga, dance, martial arts, like we mentioned, they can be good complementary practices to traditional therapy. But then you also have therapists like me and a lot of my colleagues who are working to integrate them into traditional therapy. So, for instance, like with the eye movements in EMDR or the self tapping, you can potentially do like martial arts striking along with that as the
Oh
bilateral,
wow.
moving my body back and forth. And that can be effective for people who feel like I didn't fight back in the moment that I wanted
How
to.
do we? What do you have on the horizon? What's happening for you?
Sure. Well, the latest book is the memoir that came out last fall. You Lied to Me About God. My most popular book is one called Dissociation Made Simple. So, if you're wanting to work more and learn more about the role of dissociation in trauma, I wrote that for a pretty general public audience. You can check that out. I was just contracted to write my next book, which is called Memoir Writing as Spiritual Practice. And you'll be hearing more about that because I just have found that even with all these healing practices that I do and I teach and that you asked me about today, there was something about actually sitting down to write my story from a very processed place that helped me to kind of complete a lot of the work. So yeah, I'll be
It's
working on that
cathartic,
next.
right?
Yes, very much.
Very much. Well, thank you, doctor. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. I feel very blessed to get to know you, and I hope to see you really soon. Next time I'm in the great state of Ohio, we'll do
It's
a
my
session.
pleasure.
Okay.
Yay.
Thank you. Take care.